Hey, World History kiddos. We're here on a Thursday, and so today we're going to continue our lessons with the Holocaust. And before we do that, just want to again remind you that yesterday I did assign an Ed puzzle. This will be due on Friday. Try to get it done by the end of the day Friday. If you're having issues, as always, just email me, let me know, and we'll see what we can do. But anyway, it's a pretty straightforward Ed puzzle video. It's like I said, it sort of summarizes and wraps up the Holocaust in general pretty well in an accessible way. I'm trying not to overwhelm students, but I also want you to really understand what happened and why it happened, and why that way we can prevent things like the Holocaust from happening again in the future. That Ed puzzle will be graded, and it's just to sort of supplement the lessons that I've been doing to get some, just to see that you understand what's going on essentially with the Holocaust. One thing about this Ed puzzle video, though, it skips over a significant portion of the Holocaust. It talks about a little bit of what we talked about yesterday, the Nuremberg laws, and some of the other things that happened to the Jewish population at the beginning of the Nazi rule in Germany. And then it jumps into, the concentration camps and the part of the Holocaust that we in our mind have sort of seared the images of those camps and the terrible things that happened at those camps. Obviously, that's seared into our collective consciousness as a society, but it skips over some of the other aspects that happened between those two time frames of the Holocaust, and that's what we're going to be going into today. Is sort of a little bit. That's why today's lesson I feel is really important. First, the Holocaust is very important to learn because it shows again a significant part of human history. Not only that, it's important to realize that the people who did these terrible actions, the people who um, perpetrated these horrible crimes against humanity, um, they they aren't different than people who are alive today. They're really scary. It's kind of scary and odd to say they're not much different than you or I. We all have the ability to do terrible things to each other, and in certain situations, some of us can be taken to extremes. And unfortunately, in Nazi Germany, the entire country, at least the entire government, um, was taken to an extreme, and it resulted in the Holocaust. So again, as a reminder, we went over yesterday was the idea that the Jewish people in Germany were being scapegoated for all the problems of the German economy. They were being scapegoated for losing World War I. They were being blamed for essentially all the bad things that the Germans felt they had experienced since World War I. They were blaming on the Jewish people. And essentially, the Jewish people were starting to be treated as subjects, as non-citizens. Not treated as subjects, they were turned into non-citizens. And here are just a couple of interesting images. Here you have, this is an SS soldier who is, or yeah, I believe that's an SS soldier, and he is inspecting the papers of these German Jewish citizens to make sure that they are abiding by all the arbitrary rules that the Nazi Party had set up. The not Jewish people were supposed to wear Star of David armband to whenever they were in public, so everyone would know if they were Jewish or not. And if a person got caught who was Jewish but not wearing that Star of David, they would be in, a lot of trouble. During this early time frame in the 1930s, after the Nazis take over, there are going to be a lot of small riots, sometimes big riots that occur where German property is going to be destroyed and vandalized and sometimes taken. And a lot of times it's with the support of the Nazi Party. So the Nazis really promoted and really did not care if Jewish businesses were being vandalized. And two really important concepts. Now, I already gave you on Monday, or Tuesday, I should say, sort of the main vocabulary terms to really know about the Holocaust. There are two more really important terms to understand when we talk about the Holocaust, and they're not specific to the Holocaust, but it's because of the Holocaust that these two concepts need to be seared into your brains as citizens of America, but citizens of the world as well. Those two concepts are dehumanize and marginalize. Um, Dehumanization and marginalization are the two goals that the Nazis had, that any oppressive group has when they're trying to oppress certain populations. So in Nazi Germany, it was the Jewish people who were being oppressed. And dehumanization, or to dehumanize, means to portray someone in a way that obscures or demeans, in other words, takes away a person's humanity. It's to make them less than human. So when the Nazis would take away the citizenship of Jewish people, and then the Nazis would say that the Jewish people are an inferior race, they are dehumanizing the Nazi or the Jewish people. They are saying that Jewish people are less than human. They're taking away their dignity. They're taking away the idea that these people are fully human beings that are worthy of human rights and human dignity. And when you dehumanize groups of people, what you do is you're doing it to try to marginalize them. In other words, the definition is to relegate someone or a group of people to an unimportant or powerless position within a society or a group. So, for example, like when you think of something as on the margin means it's on the outside edge of something. And when you marginalize a group of people, you're saying that group of people doesn't belong. It doesn't fit with the whole. It's on the outside edges. It doesn't belong with the rest of us. We need to get them away from us. We don't want to see these people. Push them out to the margins. We belong here in the middle. We belong, wherever we're at in Germany, or we are the ones who belong at Ashland High School. We are the ones that belong in the United States of America. These dehumanized people, these people who are less than human, we need to get them away from us. We need to marginalize them. And not only physically marginalize, but we're talking about psychologically and emotionally marginalizing them, that they are not even fully human. We should not even see them as human. They are Jews. All right. That's the concept of dehumanization and marginalization, and why that's so important. If a society can dehumanize a group of people and marginalize a group of people to the point where they don't think that group of people is fully human, then that society will be willing to do terrible things to that group of people without having any regret or remorse in the moment. And a good example is the Holocaust is a great example. The Nazis in Germany, and even, just the typical Germans were brainwashed and had enough propaganda that even the ones who weren't fully like, yay, I'm fully supportive Hitler and I really believe in Aryanism, even the ones who might have had doubts, they still had they were still dehumanized enough. They had still seen the Jewish people dehumanized enough that they were willing to step by and let terrible things happen to their Jewish neighbors. Because, at the end of the day, maybe there is something to that. Maybe I'm not saying there was, I'm just saying that's the mindset of a German person. Well, maybe there is something to all this propaganda. Maybe there is something incessantly wrong with the Jewish religion. And you know what? Maybe I'm not going to stick my neck out to try to protect my Jewish neighbor when the Nazis come calling or when the SS comes and pulls them out of their house. That's what dehumanization does. When you start to view a group of people as less than human, even if you don't fully buy in to to the entire message, if you buy in enough, it makes you apathetic to evil. All right, and we're not innocent of this in America. Like what the colonists and then the American country did to Native Americans isn't that much different. We dehumanized Native Americans. We called them savages. We still refer to them as savages in some textbooks. We marginalized them. We were then willing to do terrible things, make them march on what we called the Trail of Tears. We had wars where we completely eliminated entire tribes of Native American people, really a genocide in American history. And we don't like to paint it that way, um, but in many ways it was. And we still to this day, in textbooks, will have excerpts and passages to sort of go out of our way to, to sort of dehumanize the Native American population. Um, so my question, oh, that didn't work. Okay, my question is, how do we still do this today? All right, we like to sit and think, oh well, we don't do that anymore. We aren't trying to destroy Native Americans. We're not, putting people in death camps, Nazi death camps. But in our personal lives, we do this all the time. I do it. You do it. We all do it when there are people that we don't necessarily like, when there are, maybe it's a peer that we don't get along with, maybe it's a politician that we think is on the wrong side of a political issue. We call them names. All right, we call them stupid, we call them idiots. If there's a minority group like an LGBTQ population, we have specific names that we call those people, those human beings. And the point of doing that is it dehumanizes them. When you call somebody stupid, when you call somebody gay, when you call somebody an idiot, when you call somebody, in political terms, you say, oh, he's a Nazi. You call somebody a communist. Now, some people are part of what we call the Communist Party. That's different. When you're using it as a context, as that party is not, that person is not a full American. That person is not a full human. That dehumanizes them. It marginalizes them. It gets you to see them as less than you, less than fully human. And that's an important thing to remember. When you're interacting with people, even people you don't like, you need to see their humanity. Because if you don't, you will be willing to do terrible things and not necessarily feel bad about it in the moment. Now, 10, 20 years from now, when you look back and say, man, I was really mean to that certain group of people, to those, to those nerds, to those geeks, to those jocks, I was really mean to those people. I wish I wouldn't have been. But in the moment, when you are being mean, and I'm no different than you, when we are being mean to each other, when we are calling each other names, in that moment, it doesn't feel bad because we don't feel as though we're actually doing harm to a human being. We feel, oh, we're just being mean to these nerds. We're just being mean to these jocks. Who cares? They're not fully human. They're not fully as much as I. They're not fully like me. They have it coming. So that's just a small part of dehumanization and marginalization, but it's important. So getting back on topic a little, I'm not off topic, but getting back to the historical topic, in Nazi Germany, there is a slow, systematic dehumanization and marginalization of the Jewish people through the Nuremberg laws, through boycotts, through propaganda. The German people are starting to view, not starting, essentially, they view the Jewish people as being evil. They view them as less than human. So as the Nazis were sort of starting to expand Germany, and as they were, trying to figure out what to do with all the Jewish people, not only in Germany, but in the territories that they were taking, they came up with the idea of having concentration camps where they would not export, but essentially arrest and send Jewish people to concentration camps to get them away from, the quote unquote superior Aryan peoples of Germany. And what ends up happening is that there's going to be one young Jewish teenager who finds out that his parents were taken to one of these camps, and he decides he's going to take matters into his own hands. He is furious at the Nazi Party. This is a French teenager. He is a young Jewish boy, 17 years old. Imagine, not much older, just a couple of years older than most of you. Imagine if the government took your parents or took your family members. All right, and what would you do? Would you just sit there and take it? Well, this young man decides he's going to take matters into his own hands, and the Nazis are going to use this young man's actions as an excuse to do some really, really awful things. We call this part of the Holocaust. This is when there's this is sort of like the turning point. Like, things are bad. I don't know if we should say a turning point, but after this event that we will call Kristallnacht, the Holocaust really starts to spiral, and it gets cemented into the Nazi German mindset that the Jewish people are going to be treated even worse than they already have been. So we're going to watch a little bit of a video together about these events. It's very interesting.
When Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in 1933, he quickly began enacting anti-Jewish laws. He had long blamed the Jews for Germany's defeat in World War I and the subsequent years of hardship. To Hitler, they were the enemy that threatened his dream of supreme German nationalism. By 1935, Jews were stripped of German citizenship, refused education. Their businesses were openly boycotted by the Nazi Party. storefronts, branded with the Star of David to prevent patronage. They were effectively outcast. Hundreds of thousands fled.
The plight of Jewish children driven from Germany has stirred the sympathy and conscience of the rest of the world. Here is the first group arriving at Harwich.
But soon, the prospects for refuge would wither. Surrounding countries, worried about an overflow of immigration, tightened their borders. A dilemma Hitler counteracted by forcibly expelling foreign-born Jews. In October 1938, thousands of Polish-born Jews were arrested and deported from Germany. Among them were the parents of Herschel Goischepan. The 17-year-old was living in Paris at the time, and upon hearing about the treatment of his mother and father, he plotted revenge. On November 7th, 1938, he walked into the office of Ernst vom Rath, a Nazi German diplomat, and shot him twice in the stomach. Roth died 2 days later, and when word reached Berlin, leaders in the Nazi Party saw an opportunity to strike. In a fiery speech, Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels encouraged anti-Semitic demonstrations, and on the night of November 9th, 1938, Nazi mobs took to the streets. Rioters targeted Jewish homes, stores, schools, hospitals, and synagogues. Buildings were torched and windows smashed. German firemen and police were ordered to stand down. The violence would carry over into another day, and by the time it was over, dozens of Jewish citizens were dead, hundreds of synagogues burned, and thousands of Jewish businesses destroyed. In the days that followed, the Nazis would blame the Jewish community for the damage done, instituting a fine exceeding $5 billion in today's money. Meanwhile, 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and deported to concentration camps, and the businesses that were destroyed were banned from ever reopening again. This was no longer harassment. It was directed violence. Violence that would grow more sadistic in the ensuing years, spiraling into one of the worst atrocities in human history. For the Jews of Germany, and soon the Jews of Europe, by the end of 1938, the shadows of hate had begun their march, and the only light left to flicker were the flames still leaping from the charred remains that an oppressed people once called home.
And so there you see the video that shows what happened. A young 17-year-old boy learning that his parents were exported because they were not born, they were a non-German born Jews. So they were born in, I believe, Poland, but living in Germany. This young boy had been exiled to France because their families wanted their children to get somewhere safe. But eventually the countries around Germany decide, no, we don't want to take any more Jewish people in. We don't want an influx of what are called refugees. So Hitler says, well, we need to do something with all these Jewish people because, we don't want them here because, we're Nazis. So he sends the boy's family, has them deported over to Poland. Well, regardless, what ends up happening is the 17-year-old boy takes matters into his own hands and assassinates a pretty high-ranking Nazi official. But what the Nazis do is they see this as a huge opportunity. They can say, hey, look, Germany, look at this. One of these Jewish people, they murdered one of our leaders. And they can say, you see, we told you, these Jewish people, they're evil, they're bad, they're murderers. And not only that, but they say that this kid didn't act by himself. This is an entire Jewish plot to take down Nazi Germany. And it feeds into this German mindset, and they whip the German people up into a state of frenzy and essentially unleash the German people into Jewish communities all across Germany. And what Kristallnacht is, it is 2 nights in November of 1938 where the people of Germany, led by Hitler Youth, so again, these are kids kind of your age who have been indoctrinated to hate Jewish people, are sort of leading this or given the responsibility of leading this group. It was all planned by the Nazis. And also the SA, what we call stormtroopers. And they destroy and vandalize and steal and unleashed just all sorts of terror on Jewish communities throughout Germany. There are many Jewish people killed. Jewish shops and synagogues are burned, and the police are told to stay out of it. The firefighters are said are told to let these synagogues burn. The only time you're supposed to stop the fire if it's going to spread to a non-Jewish place. Eventually, over 30,000 are arrested and sent to concentration camps. Again, synagogues and businesses are not only destroyed, but they're vandalized. They're looted. The Nazis were famous for going into German, not Jewish, but Jewish places of business, Jewish homes, and stealing anything of value. Again, stores were looted, homes were destroyed, and eventually, shortly after, um, the Nazi Party uses propaganda to blame all of this destruction, to actually blame on the Jewish people. They said, look at this destruction that the Jewish people caused. We need to get rid of them. We need to get them out of our schools. We need to give their businesses to non-Jewish people. So they use this. They use the murder as an excuse to to rile the people up to attack and destroy all this Jewish property. Then they use that to say, look at how violent and terrible these Jewish people are. Look at all this violence that broke out because of the Jewish people. We can't trust them. And so what we need to do is take all their businesses. We need to expel them from any sort of schools. And this is when the German people had been worked up and into enough of a frenzy that they just stopped caring what happened to the Jewish people. There were some Germans who tried to stand up and do the right thing, non-Jewish Germans, but very few. They were either too terrified or they had been indoctrinated enough that they actually kind of went along with it, or at least didn't speak up because it wasn't, it wasn't they weren't going to put their necks out on the line um, for the Jewish people. And here you see some images: a synagogue that was completely burned, a Jewish business that had been vandalized and looted. And so here comes the question. It's not really a question. I shouldn't say that. There's going to be a question that comes up tomorrow. But um, here's the issue that the Nazis had to deal with. So now that essentially after Kristallnacht, the German government, with the support of its people, decided, hey, we don't want these Jewish people around us. We don't want their businesses around us. We don't want their kids in our schools. We don't want any of this. So what should we do with all these Jewish people? There's not enough room in concentration camps just to put all of them in concentration camps. And so in 1939, and they're going to be actually organized and they're going to be starting before 1939, but really in 1939, what the Germans do is they force a lot of Jewish people into ghettos. Also in 1939 is when Germany is going to invade Poland. Germany is going to invade France, well, in 1940s when they invade France. But they're going to be conquering a lot of territory that has a lot of Jewish people in it. And they have to figure out, what are we going to do? So what they do is they start to put Jewish people into ghettos. A ghetto, you hear the word ghetto. Technically what a ghetto is, it is a part of any city in which there is a large minority group that lives especially in that particular part of the city. All right, and they're there because of either social, legal, or economic pressure. So in this situation, legally, um, Jewish people were forced to live in a specific part of the city called a ghetto, and they would construct walls around the ghetto so that Jewish people couldn't go in or out of the ghetto, and they were guarded. And essentially, these ghettos were severely overpopulated, particularly in a ghetto in Poland called the Warsaw Ghetto. Um, the, they were Jewish people were imported into the ghetto, or I should say, were forced to immigrate into the ghettos. Um, and there wasn't enough room for everyone. There wasn't enough economic resources to take care of everyone. It was overcrowded. The conditions were terrible. People were starving. And again, no one was allowed in or out other than Nazi soldiers who would come in and out. And so there would be some areas of the walls where children or very small people or children could sort of crawl through to get out and maybe get some food to bring back in. But in general, the ghettos were terrible, terrible living conditions. And when there's overcrowding, that oftentimes again leads to famine, that leads to disease, it leads to illness, just a really terrible situation. So again, ghettos are particular areas in the city where a specific ethnic group or religion or a specific group of people are forced to live. The Jewish people are forced from their homes, and the Nazis would essentially just take anything they wanted out of their houses and force Jewish people into the ghettos. They're very unsanitary and crowded. And another despicably interesting thing the Nazis did, and interesting is probably not the right word, but the Nazis would also use Jewish people and other non-Aryan races, but particularly Jewish people, to sort of experiment what the human condition could endure, what the human body could endure. So the Nazis would use mass hunger, heat deprivation, just to see what mortality rates would look like given certain circumstances, just to use Jewish people as lab rats, essentially. And so there you can see this is, I forget, I think this is the Warsaw Ghetto. There are multiple ghettos in some of the larger cities, particularly in Nazi-occupied Poland. You can see just how crowded these ghettos were, and you can see in Nazi-occupied Poland, this is where a lot of the people, a lot of the Jewish people were forced to travel to and live in. And it's important to note that the Jewish people didn't just sit there and let this all happen to them. They did try to leave. A lot of them did want to escape Germany, but nobody wanted to take them in because anti-Semitism wasn't just something that was unique to Germany. There are a lot of countries and political governments and leaders who did not want Jewish refugees inside of their borders. The United States was one of those, by the way. We'll go over that next week. Um, but but in general, they slowly saw their rights being taken away. Some of them thought it would be okay. Some of them thought that they would persevere. They didn't think things would get as bad as they would eventually end up getting. But there were a number that actually did try to fight back. It's a myth that the Jewish people just sit there and let themselves, be led to slaughter, so to speak. It's kind of a gross thing to say, but um, uh, and one very famous event occurred actually in the Warsaw Ghetto. And I want to watch a little video about this. And it's important to note that it's not like these territories that were occupied by the Nazis that they didn't try to fight back. And it's a good lesson to know that even if things seem like, if you feel like it's that bad things are happening and you're powerless, it doesn't mean that you just have to sit there and let it happen. There are great examples of people who try to fight back against overwhelming odds to gain their freedom. And there's a really good example in the Warsaw Ghetto. So I want to go ahead and show that.
The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was the first instance of popular urban armed resistance in Nazi-occupied Europe. On 22nd July 1942, the Germans began mass deportations from the Warsaw Ghetto. From then, and until 21st September, over 250,000 Jews from the ghetto were transported in sealed freight cars to the Treblinka death camp. As the deportations increased and the realization grew that the Jews were being sent to their deaths, two resistance groups were formed. The ZOB, Jewish Fighting Organization, under the leadership of Mordechai Anilovich, and a smaller group, the ZZW, Jewish Military Union, led by Pavel Frenkel. Mordechai Anilovich would have gone through fire for his comrades, and they were just as willing to risk their lives for him. The Jewish fighters obtained arms from the Polish underground and other sources and smuggled them into the ghetto. The second round of deportations began on 18th January 1943 and brought the opening shot of the ghetto uprising. A group of Jews waiting to board the train for deportation opened fire on the guards and fled. After this act of resistance, the Germans stopped the action. This was a turning point among the Jews in the ghetto who believed that the transports were stopped because of the resistance. On Passover Eve, 19th April 1943, the liquidation of the ghetto began. When the German forces entered the ghetto, they were ambushed by the Jewish fighters. The resistance groups fought together, attacking the German soldiers in the ghetto's narrow alleys, shooting and throwing grenades and Molotov cocktails from the sewers and windows. The German forces suffered losses, and their advance on the ghetto was halted. For 4 days, the Polish flag and the blue and white flag flew over Muranowski Square. The flags had great importance for morale This reminder of Poland emotionally stirred hundreds of thousands of people and united Poles and Jews. Flags and national colors are means of war, exactly like shots from automatic weapons, more like thousands of shots. After 5 days of fighting, the Germans began systematically torching the ghetto houses, which became fire traps for their inhabitants. Mordechai Anilovich and the other remaining leaders refused to surrender and fought until their last breath. His deputy, Marek Edelman, escaped through the sewers. The uprising was finally crushed on 16th May 1943 with the destruction of Warsaw's Great Synagogue. For an entire month, the untrained, poorly equipped Jewish fighters had bravely held off the German forces. To compare, in 1940, the Germans overran all of Western Europe in only 6 weeks. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising served as an example that inspired other Jews in other ghettos and camps. This was a war of less than 1,000 people against a mighty army, and it isn't a subject for study in military academies, but in a school that studies the human spirit, it should be a major subject. What is important is the strength of Jewish youths, after years of poverty and humiliation, to stand up to their killers and to choose how to die, Treblinka or death.
And so again, what happened in Warsaw is that eventually we're going to get into stage 5 of the Holocaust tomorrow. And stage 5 is when the Germans decide, you know, there's just too many Jewish people. We don't know what to do with them. We need to come up with a solution. And they come up with what's called the final solution. We'll go over that tomorrow. But regardless, what happens is that the Germans are going to go into the Warsaw Ghetto, and they're going to take a whole lot of Jewish people, put them on cattle cars, trains, and send them to a death camp. And eventually, the people of Warsaw, they kind of figure out what's going on. They realize, you know, the people who are being put on these trains, they're probably not coming back, and they're probably going to a pretty bad place. So they say, you know what? Forget it. We're going to fight. We're going to do everything we can. We're not going to let this happen to us. And so that's the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and it inspires a lot of other underground uprisings. So it's a very interesting part of the Holocaust. And again, it's important to remember that when bad things were happening and when all else seemed to fail, that the people of the subjects, the Jewish people, not only and other groups as well, they tried to fight back. They tried their hardest, and it's important to realize that they didn't just sit around and let terrible things happen. Unfortunately, a lot of the other people of Germany did sit around and let terrible things happen, and wouldn't stand up and fight when the earlier to keep these terrible things from going on. So anyway, big lessons from today. Yesterday, we learned about how the Germans dehumanized, marginalized the Jewish population to the point where most Germans were okay with letting whatever happened to the Jews happen. They might not necessarily have wanted every Jewish person to die and get sent to death camps and into ghettos, but at the same token, the propaganda and the indoctrination had the German people, dehumanized the Jewish people enough that the average German wasn't willing to stick his or her neck out to stop the Holocaust from happening. And it's an important lesson for us to know, because we dehumanize people all the time. Unfortunately, it's a part of human nature. We like to feel superior to others. I don't know why that is. It just is. I'm as guilty of it as anyone. But it's important to keep in mind that it's not okay, and that we have to always strive to see the humanities and humanity in others. And eventually that's going to lead to the Kristallnacht, and eventually then that leads into the Germans allowing Jewish people to be exported to ghettos, and from the ghettos we'll go into tomorrow. Hope you guys are having a good week. I know this is deep. I know this is heavy. The good thing is we study this so that this doesn't happen today, that this doesn't happen tomorrow or in the future. We study these deep, dark things, not because, I don't know, not to glorify them or make them wonderful things, because they aren't, But it's to help remind us that we've come a long way and that we need to make sure um, we keep remembering the event so that we don't participate in future Holocausts. So anyway, yeah. Tomorrow we'll finish up in terms of the actual history of the Holocaust, what we call the final solution. Next Monday and Tuesday, we're going to go into sort of the more interesting psychological experiments that were done in the 60s and 70s that kind of show that we as Americans are not necessarily much different than the Nazi Germans in certain circumstances. I want to really preface that. I'm not saying we're a bunch of Nazis, okay? I'm not saying that at all. But it's important to know that we do have those dark tendencies. Every person does, whether they're from America, Germany, Britain, Russia, whatever. We all have those. All right. Have a great day, everyone. If you haven't done that puzzle video, get that done. And I'll be back with you tomorrow. All right. See you later. Bye.